Marcus Rodriguez pushed his mop bucket down the hallway of Naval Special Warfare Command, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor. At 45 years old, he had been cleaning these same corridors for 8 years, invisible to most of the elite warriors who walked past him daily. The SEALs barely acknowledged his presence, treating him like part of the furniture as they discussed classified missions and training exercises. "Watch where you're going, Janitor," Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison sneered as he brushed past Marcus, nearly knocking over the cleaning cart. Harrison was the type of officer who believed his rank made him superior to everyone around him, especially support staff. His perfectly pressed uniform and polished boots reflected his obsession with appearances over substance. Marcus simply nodded and continued mopping, his weathered hands gripping the handle with practiced ease. What these young warriors didn't know was that before he cleaned their floors, he had walked through jungles in Vietnam, carrying an M60 machine gun and watching his brothers fall in firefights that lasted for hours. Before he emptied their trash cans, he had crawled through mud in Cambodia on missions that officially never happened. The other janitors and maintenance staff knew pieces of Marcus's story, but even they didn't understand the full scope of his military background. To them, he was just a quiet older man who did his job well and never complained about the extra hours or difficult assignments. They saw his small apartment, his old truck, and his simple lifestyle, never suspecting that he chose simplicity over the chaos he once lived through daily. Master Chief Petty Officer Tom Sullivan was different from the others. At 52, he had served long enough to recognize something familiar in Marcus's bearing. The way the janitor moved with purpose, the way his eyes automatically scanned rooms when he entered, the way he positioned himself near exits. These were habits that military training embedded deep into a person's core. One evening, as Marcus cleaned the briefing room after a long strategy session, Sullivan approached him. The room still smelled of coffee and stress sweat from the hours-long planning meeting for an upcoming deployment to Afghanistan. "You served," Sullivan said quietly, not making it a question. Marcus paused in his cleaning, looking up at the Master Chief. "Long time ago." "Where?" "Vietnam." 3 tours. "Then, some places that don't exist on maps." Sullivan nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. "What unit?" "Started with the 173rd Airborne. Then, moved to some groups that didn't have official names." The Master Chief understood. Special operations in Vietnam had been a different world, full of classified missions and denied operations. "Why are you here, cleaning our floors?" Marcus resumed, wiping down the conference table. "Man's got to work somewhere. This place feels familiar." What Marcus didn't tell Sullivan was the complete truth. After Vietnam, he had spent 15 years in various special operations units, participating in missions across Central America, Africa, and the Middle East. He had trained insurgents in El Salvador, hunted war criminals in Bosnia, and provided security for diplomatic missions in countries where American soldiers weren't supposed to be. His specialty had been long-range precision shooting. In the military, they called it sniper work, but Marcus preferred to think of himself as a problem solver who happened to use rifles. He could put a bullet exactly where it needed to go from distances that most people couldn't even see clearly. His longest confirmed kill was 1,847 meters, made with a rifle he had assembled himself from carefully selected components. But after 23 years of military service, Marcus had grown tired of the constant deployments, the political games, and watching young soldiers make the same mistakes that got people killed. When he retired, he wanted peace. He wanted routine. He wanted to be around warriors without having to be one himself. The janitor position at the SEAL base provided exactly that environment. He could observe the training, listen to the planning, and feel connected to the military world without having the responsibility of leading men into combat. It was his way of staying close to the brotherhood while maintaining his distance from violence. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, however, made that peace difficult to maintain. The young officer seemed to take personal offense at Marcus's presence, as if having a janitor around somehow diminished the prestige of the special operations community. "I don't understand why they hire these old-timers," Harrison complained loudly to his fellow officers one afternoon as Marcus cleaned nearby. "We should have professional cleaning services, not some washed-up veteran who probably couldn't cut it in the real military." The other officers shifted uncomfortably. Most of them respected the support staff and understood that many of the civilian employees were former military personnel who continued serving in different capacities. Marcus continued his work without reaction, but Master Chief Sullivan noticed the slight tightening around the janitor's eyes. He had seen that look before in veteran warriors who were exercising tremendous self-control. "That's enough, Harrison," Sullivan said firmly. "Show some respect." "For what?" "He's a janitor. I've got classified briefings to attend and million-dollar equipment to maintain. I shouldn't have to worry about stepping around cleaning supplies." What Harrison didn't realize was that Marcus had security clearances that exceeded most of the officers on the base. His decades of special operations work had required him to handle information far more sensitive than anything discussed in the standard SEAL briefings. He could have shared stories about missions that would make Harrison's training exercises seem like playground games, but he chose silence instead. The tension between Harrison and Marcus continued to escalate over the following months. The lieutenant commander seemed to go out of his way to make the janitor's job more difficult, scheduling meetings in rooms that Marcus needed to clean, leaving messes in common areas, and making disparaging comments about the support staff in front of his subordinates. Marcus endured it all with the patience of someone who had survived much worse treatment from much more dangerous people. He had been tortured by enemy forces, betrayed by supposed allies, and abandoned by his own government on missions that went wrong. A young officer's petty harassment was barely worth his attention. But the other support staff began to notice the pattern. Maria Santos, who worked in the cafeteria, had watched Harrison deliberately spill coffee on a floor that Marcus had just mopped. David Chun, the electronics technician, had seen the lieutenant commander leave classified documents scattered on a conference table, then blame Marcus for not securing them properly. "Why don't you report him?" Maria asked Marcus during their lunch break. They sat in the small employee break room, eating sandwiches and talking quietly. "Report him for what? Being young and stupid? That's not against regulations. He's creating a hostile work environment. You've got rights." Marcus smiled grimly. "I've survived worse hostile environments than this." What Marcus couldn't explain to Maria was that he actually found Harrison's behavior educational. The young officer's arrogance and lack of respect for experience were exactly the traits that got people killed in combat. Observing Harrison was like watching a case study in dangerous leadership habits. In Vietnam, Marcus had served under officers like Harrison, men who believed their rank made them infallible, who dismissed the knowledge of enlisted personnel, and who prioritized their own career advancement over the safety of their troops. He had also served under exceptional leaders who understood that wisdom could come from any source, and that respect had to be earned through actions, not demanded through position. Master Chief Sullivan fell into the latter category. Over the months, he had developed a genuine friendship with Marcus, often staying late to chat after briefings or sharing coffee during quiet moments. Sullivan recognized that the janitor possessed a depth of experience that could benefit the younger SEALs, but he also respected Marcus's desire to remain in the background. "Ever think about sharing some of your knowledge with the new guys?" Sullivan asked one evening as Marcus cleaned the training equipment. "They've got instructors for that. You know what I mean? Real-world experience. The stuff they don't teach in schools." Marcus paused in his work. They wouldn't listen. Young warriors think they know everything. Some would listen, and some would end up like Harrison, thinking that hearing war stories makes them ready for war. Sullivan understood the distinction. There was a difference between learning from experience and simply collecting stories. Real knowledge transfer required respect, humility, and the ability to apply lessons to new situations. Most young soldiers lack those qualities until combat taught them the hard way. The conversation was interrupted by Harrison entering the training room with two of his team members. The lieutenant commander looked annoyed to find the Master Chief talking with the janitor. "Chief, we need to discuss tomorrow's exercise. Could you join us in the briefing room?" "In a minute," Sullivan replied. "I'm finishing up here." Harrison's jaw tightened. "I said we need to discuss it now. The mission parameters have changed." The implied criticism was clear. Sullivan was wasting time talking to support staff when he should be focused on important military matters. Marcus resumed his cleaning, but he noticed the tension in the room and the way Harrison's team members looked uncomfortable with their leader's attitude. "Go ahead, Chief," Marcus said quietly. "I've got work to finish anyway." Sullivan hesitated, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. Marcus removing himself from a situation that could escalate into something more serious. The Master Chief had seen enough military politics to know when someone was deliberately avoiding a confrontation. As the officers left, Marcus continued cleaning, but his mind was elsewhere. He was remembering a mission in 1987, in a country whose name was still classified, where a young lieutenant had refused to listen to the advice of an experienced sergeant. The lieutenant's arrogance had resulted in 3 dead soldiers and a failed mission that took 2 years to complete through alternative means. The memory reinforced Marcus's decision to stay in the background. He had learned through bitter experience that some people could only learn through their own mistakes, regardless of how much guidance was offered. His job now was to clean floors and empty trash cans, not to mentor warriors who didn't want mentoring. But as he worked, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Harrison's attitude was more than just young officer arrogance. There was something reckless about the man's approach to leadership that went beyond normal inexperience. It was the kind of recklessness that could get people killed when the stakes were real. The base began preparing for a major deployment to Afghanistan, where Taliban forces had been increasing their activities against coalition troops. The mission would involve multiple SEAL teams working in coordination with other special operations units to target high-value terrorist leaders in remote mountain regions. Marcus watched the preparations with professional interest, noting the equipment being readied, the intensity of the training exercises, and the serious expressions on the faces of the warriors who would soon be risking their lives in actual combat. He remembered his own pre-deployment preparations decades earlier. The mixture of excitement and fear that came with knowing that training was about to become deadly reality. Harrison's team was selected for one of the more dangerous assignments, a direct action mission targeting a Taliban commander who had been responsible for multiple attacks against American forces. The intelligence indicated that the target was located in a heavily fortified compound in a remote valley, surrounded by loyal fighters and protected by natural terrain that limited approach routes. During the mission briefings, Marcus cleaned around the edges of the room, invisible to most of the participants, but absorbing every detail of the planning process. He noticed that Harrison seemed focused on the glory aspects of the mission rather than the practical challenges of execution. The young officer spoke confidently about assault tactics and extraction procedures, but he showed little interest in contingency planning or risk mitigation. Master Chief Sullivan raised several important questions about potential complications. What would happen if the helicopters couldn't land due to weather? How the team would handle unexpected civilian presence? What backup plans existed if the primary target wasn't at the location? Harrison dismissed most of these concerns as overthinking, insisting that the mission was straightforward and that excessive planning would only create confusion. Marcus had heard similar attitudes before, usually from officers who confuse confidence with competence. In his experience, the most dangerous missions were often the ones that appeared straightforward in the briefing room, but became complex nightmares once boots were on the ground. As the deployment date approached, the base activity intensified. Equipment was packed, communications systems were tested, and final training exercises were conducted to ensure readiness. Marcus continued his daily routines, but he found himself paying closer attention to the preparations, particularly those involving Harrison's team. 2 nights before departure, Marcus was cleaning the armory when he overheard a conversation between 2 of Harrison's subordinates. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres and Petty Officer First Class Alex Thompson were discussing their concerns about the upcoming mission. "Something doesn't feel right about this whole thing," Torres said quietly as he checked his equipment. The lieutenant's rushing through the planning like it's a training exercise. "I know what you mean," Thompson replied. "He keeps talking about how easy it's going to be, but easy missions don't require SEAL teams." Marcus continued his work silently, but he was listening intently. The concerns voiced by these experienced operators echoed his own observations about Harrison's leadership style. "Did you see how he reacted when the chief suggested we bring additional medical supplies?" Torres continued, "like he was personally offended that anyone would question his judgment. That's what worries me. In training, his attitude is just annoying. In combat, it could get us killed." The conversation confirmed Marcus's assessment of the situation. Harrison was displaying all the classic signs of an officer who prioritized his own image over the safety and effectiveness of his team. It was a personality type that Marcus had encountered multiple times throughout his military career, and it never ended well. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work to find unusual activity around the base. Intelligence reports had come in overnight, suggesting that the Taliban forces in the target area were more heavily armed than originally assessed. The mission parameters were being re-evaluated to account for the new threat information. Marcus watched as officers hurried between briefing rooms, updating plans, and adjusting equipment loads. The atmosphere had shifted from routine deployment preparation to urgent mission modification. It was the kind of last-minute intelligence that experienced operators took seriously, but that inexperienced leaders sometimes viewed as unnecessary complications. Harrison's reaction to the new intelligence was predictably dismissive. During the updated briefing session, he argued that the reports were probably exaggerated and that changing the mission plan at the last minute would create more problems than it solved. "We've trained for this specific scenario," Harrison insisted to the mission commander. "My team is ready to execute as planned. These intelligence updates are just going to confuse the execution." The mission commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Brooks, was a seasoned special operations veteran who had learned to trust intelligence reports over optimistic assessments. "The reports indicate possible heavy weapons in the area, including anti-aircraft systems. We need to adjust our approach accordingly. Sir, with respect, we're SEALs. We're trained to handle heavy resistance. If we start second-guessing every intelligence report, we'll never complete any missions." Marcus, cleaning nearby, recognized the fundamental error in Harrison's reasoning. Good intelligence wasn't something to be dismissed. It was something to be integrated into planning to increase the chances of mission success and personnel survival. The meeting continued for another hour, with Harrison ultimately being ordered to accept the modified mission parameters despite his objections. As the officers filed out of the briefing room, Marcus noticed the concerned expressions on the faces of the more experienced personnel. Master Chief Sullivan lingered as Marcus cleaned up the briefing materials. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Marcus looked up from his work. "About what?" "You know what? You've been around long enough to recognize the signs." Marcus considered his response carefully. He had made it a policy not to criticize active military personnel, especially officers, regardless of his personal opinions about their capabilities. "Young officers sometimes learn better from experience than from advice," he said finally. Sullivan nodded grimly. "That's what I'm afraid of." As Marcus finished his cleaning duties that evening, he found himself thinking about the upcoming mission and the young warriors who would be carrying it out. He had seen too many good soldiers die because of poor leadership decisions, and he recognized the pattern developing around Harrison's team. But he also knew that his role was to clean floors and empty trash cans, not to mentor officers who had made it clear they didn't value his presence. He had chosen this quiet life specifically to avoid the responsibilities and complications that came with active military service. Still, as he locked up his cleaning supplies and headed home to his small apartment, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching a preventable disaster unfold. The combination of Harrison's arrogance, the modified intelligence reports, and the dangerous nature of the mission created exactly the kind of situation where experience and good judgment became matters of life and death. That night, Marcus lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and remembering other missions, other young officers, and other moments when he had seen disaster approaching, but had been powerless to prevent it. The memories weren't pleasant, but they were part of the price of having survived as long as he had in a profession where survival was never guaranteed. Tomorrow, Harrison's team would deploy to Afghanistan, and Marcus would return to his routine of cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. But he suspected that this particular deployment would test more than just the team's tactical skills. It would test whether Harrison's confidence was based on genuine capability or dangerous delusion. The answer to that question would determine whether the team returned home safely or became another tragic example of what happened when arrogance replaced wisdom in the deadly calculus of modern warfare. 3 weeks later, Marcus was mopping the floors in the base hospital wing when he heard the helicopters approaching. The sound was wrong. The engines were straining, and only 2 aircraft were returning when 3 had departed for Afghanistan. His trained ear immediately recognized the distress signals in the rotor noise. Emergency vehicles raced across the tarmac as the helicopters landed hard, their pilots fighting to control damaged aircraft. Medical personnel rushed toward the aircraft with stretchers and emergency equipment, moving with the urgency that indicated serious casualties. Marcus abandoned his mop and moved toward the windows, watching as injured SEALs were carried from the helicopters. Even from a distance, he could see the blood-soaked uniforms and the desperate movements of the medical teams working to save lives. Master Chief Sullivan appeared beside him, his face grim. "Harrison's team," he said quietly. "The mission went bad." Through the chaos, Marcus could see Lieutenant Commander Harrison being helped from one of the helicopters. He was walking, but his left arm hung useless at his side, and his face was covered in blood and dirt. Behind him, stretcher teams carried 2 figures who weren't moving. "How bad?" Marcus asked. "2 Kia for wounded." They walked into a trap. Marcus felt the familiar cold sensation in his stomach that came with hearing about preventable casualties. He had experienced it too many times throughout his military career, and it never got easier. Over the following hours, details of the failed mission began to emerge. Harrison's team had been tasked with capturing or eliminating a Taliban commander in a remote mountain compound. The intelligence reports had indicated possible heavy weapons in the area, but Harrison had dismissed those concerns during planning. The team had approached the target location according to the original plan, despite updated intelligence suggesting increased enemy presence. They had landed 2 kilometers from the compound and moved through the mountains on foot, expecting light resistance from a small group of Taliban fighters. Instead, they had walked into a carefully prepared ambush. The Taliban had known about the mission and had positioned nearly 60 fighters with heavy weapons around the valley. The first indication of trouble came when rocket-propelled grenades destroyed the team's primary extraction point before they even reached the target compound. Petty Officer First Class Alex Thompson had died in the initial barrage, caught in the open when the ambush began. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres had lived long enough to return fire and help establish a defensive position, but a mortar round had killed him 20 minutes into the firefight. The surviving team members had found themselves pinned down in rocky terrain with limited ammunition, no communication with their support elements, and enemies on 3 sides. Their situation had gone from bad to desperate when Taliban fighters began moving to surround their position completely. Harrison, despite his injuries, had managed to coordinate the defense for the first hour of the engagement. But as ammunition ran low and casualties mounted, it became clear that the team wouldn't survive without immediate assistance. The rescue operation had taken 4 hours to organize and execute, during which time the remaining SEALs had fought off multiple attempts by Taliban forces to overrun their position. By the time the extraction helicopters arrived, 2 more team members were seriously wounded, and their ammunition was nearly exhausted. Marcus learned these details gradually, through conversations he overheard while cleaning around the base, and through his discussions with Master Chief Sullivan. Each piece of information confirmed his worst fears about Harrison's leadership and decision-making during the mission. He ignored the intelligence updates, Sullivan said during one of their evening conversations. The enemy knew we were coming, and they were ready for us. How did they know? That's still being investigated. But even if they had known, a better approach might have avoided the ambush entirely. Marcus understood what Sullivan wasn't saying directly. An experienced leader would have adapted the mission plan based on the updated intelligence, possibly choosing a different approach route or calling for additional support. Harrison's insistence on following the original plan had turned a difficult mission into a deadly trap. The official investigation would take weeks to complete, but the preliminary findings were already clear. The mission had failed due to inadequate planning, poor intelligence integration, and tactical errors that had put the team at unnecessary risk. Harrison survived his injuries, but his military career was effectively over. The loss of 2 team members under his command, combined with the circumstances that led to their deaths, would result in a quiet administrative transfer to a non-combat position. He would never lead SEALs in combat again. For Marcus, the tragedy was both personal and familiar. He had seen similar scenarios play out throughout his military career. Young officers whose confidence exceeded their competence, resulting in preventable casualties among the soldiers they were supposed to protect. But this case felt different because Marcus had been present during the planning phase. He had observed Harrison's dismissive attitude toward the intelligence reports and his resistance to modifying the mission parameters. He had recognized the warning signs, but had chosen to remain silent. The guilt of that silence weighed heavily on him as he went about his daily cleaning routines. He began to question whether his decision to stay in the background had been wise or simply cowardly. Could he have prevented the disaster by speaking up during the planning sessions? Master Chief Sullivan seemed to sense Marcus's internal struggle. During one of their conversations, he brought up the subject directly. "It wasn't your place to intervene," Sullivan said as they sat in the break room during a quiet afternoon. "Your civilian support staff. The planning was the responsibility of the officers." "I've seen this before," Marcus replied quietly. "The same pattern, the same mistakes. Maybe if I had said something, Harrison wouldn't have listened. You know that. He barely listened to me, and I'm a Master Chief with 30 years of experience." Sullivan was right, but the logic didn't ease Marcus's sense of responsibility. He had watched good soldiers walk into a trap, and he had done nothing to warn them. The fact that his warnings probably wouldn't have been heeded didn't change the reality that 2 young warriors were dead. The base atmosphere changed dramatically in the weeks following the failed mission. The usual confidence and swagger that characterized SEAL operations was replaced by a more somber awareness of mortality and the consequences of poor decision-making. New training protocols were implemented, focusing on intelligence analysis and adaptive planning. Officers were required to attend additional briefings on incorporating last-minute intelligence updates into mission execution. The changes were necessary, but they came too late to help Thompson and Torres. Marcus found himself paying closer attention to the conversations he overheard while cleaning. He listened to the young SEALs discussing the lessons learned from the failed mission and the changes being implemented in their training. Some seemed to understand the importance of humility and careful planning, while others appeared to view the incident as an isolated example of bad luck. One evening, while cleaning the memorial wall where photographs of fallen SEALs were displayed, Marcus paused at the newly added pictures of Thompson and Torres. Both men had been in their 20s, with young families and promising military careers ahead of them. Their deaths represented not just personal tragedies, but also the loss of years of training and experience that could never be replaced. As he stood before the memorial, Marcus made a decision that would change his quiet routine at the base. He would no longer remain silent when he observed dangerous patterns in planning or leadership. He wouldn't interfere directly, but he would find ways to share his knowledge with those who might listen and benefit from his experience. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A new group of SEAL officers had arrived for advanced training, including several lieutenant commanders who would soon be leading teams in combat operations. Master Chief Sullivan was responsible for their tactical education, and he approached Marcus with an unusual request. "I want you to participate in some of the planning exercises," Sullivan said during one of their evening conversations. "Not officially, but as an observer who can provide perspective." "What kind of perspective?" "The kind that comes from 30 years of special operations experience. These young officers need to understand that rank doesn't equal wisdom, and that good intelligence can come from unexpected sources." Marcus was hesitant. He had chosen his background role specifically to avoid the responsibilities that came with active participation in military operations. But the memory of Thompson and Torres made it difficult to refuse. "What would I be expected to do?" "Just observe the planning sessions and provide feedback when asked. Share your experience without overstepping boundaries." After several days of consideration, Marcus agreed to participate in the training program. His first session would be a simulated mission planning exercise similar to the one that had resulted in the failed Afghanistan operation. The briefing room was filled with 8 lieutenant commanders, all eager to demonstrate their tactical knowledge and leadership capabilities. Master Chief Sullivan introduced Marcus simply as a consultant with extensive special operations experience, without providing details about his background. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several of the officers looked skeptical about taking advice from a man they had seen cleaning their facilities. Others seemed curious about his qualifications and experience. A few appeared openly dismissive of the idea that a civilian contractor could contribute meaningfully to military planning. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, the senior officer in the group, spoke first. "Chief Sullivan, what exactly is the purpose of having civilian input in our planning exercise?" "To provide a different perspective based on real-world experience," Sullivan replied. "Sometimes fresh eyes can identify problems that we might miss. With respect, we're all experienced officers with extensive training in special operations planning. I'm not sure what additional value civilian oversight would provide." Marcus recognized the tone. It was similar to Harrison's attitude during the pre-deployment briefings: confident, dismissive, and potentially dangerous. "I'm not here to provide oversight," Marcus said quietly. "I'm here to observe and answer questions if anyone has them." The training scenario was based on a realistic situation: a hostage rescue mission in a hostile urban environment. The officers were provided with intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and tactical resources, then asked to develop a comprehensive plan for infiltrating the target location, neutralizing the hostiles, and extracting the hostages safely. Marcus watched as the group worked through the planning process. They were clearly intelligent and well-trained with solid technical knowledge of tactics and equipment. But as the session progressed, he began to notice familiar patterns that concerned him. The officers were focusing heavily on the assault phase of the operation while giving minimal attention to contingency planning and risk mitigation. They seemed confident that their primary plan would work as designed, without adequate consideration of what could go wrong. Lieutenant Commander Chun took the lead in the planning, demonstrating strong organizational skills and tactical knowledge. But Marcus noticed that she was dismissing input from some of the junior officers who raised potential complications. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Robert Kim said during one planning discussion, "what if the hostiles have changed locations since the last intelligence update?" "The intelligence is less than 12 hours old," Chun replied. "We have to work with the best information available. But if they have moved, our entire approach will be compromised. We can't plan for every possible scenario. At some point, we have to execute based on the intelligence we have." Marcus had heard similar conversations during the planning sessions for Harrison's mission. The logic sounded reasonable, but it reflected a dangerous tendency to dismiss valid concerns in favor of operational simplicity. When the planning session concluded, Master Chief Sullivan asked Marcus for his assessment. The other officers listened with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. "The plan is technically sound," Marcus said carefully, but it assumes everything will go according to the intelligence reports. That's what intelligence is for, Chen responded. To provide accurate information for planning purposes. Intelligence is always incomplete and sometimes wrong. Good plans account for that possibility. How do you account for unknown factors? You can't plan for things you don't know about. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. He wanted to share his knowledge without lecturing or offending the officers who would ultimately be responsible for executing missions. In my experience, the most dangerous missions are the ones that seem straightforward in the briefing room. When everything appears to be going according to plan, that's when you need to be most alert for problems. Liut Commander Himnodit. What kind of problems? Changed enemy dispositions. Unexpected civilian presence. Equipment failures. Weather changes. Communication breakdowns. The list is endless. So how do you plan for endless possibilities? Chun asked, her tone still skeptical. You build flexibility into the plan. Multiple approach routes. Alternative extraction points. Additional resources on standby. Clear abort criteria. The goal isn't to predict every problem, but to maintain options when problems occur. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus sharing specific examples from his experience without revealing classified details or locations. Some of the officers seemed genuinely interested in his perspective, while others remained convinced that their original approach was adequate. Over the following weeks, Marcus participated in several more training exercises. Each session provided opportunities to observe different leadership styles and planning approaches among the young officers. Some were receptive to outside input and alternative perspectives, while others remained closed to suggestions that challenged their initial assumptions. The experience reminded Marcus of his own development as a young soldier. He remembered being confident in his abilities and resistant to advice from older, more experienced personnel. It had taken several dangerous situations and some hard-learned lessons to teach him the value of humility and careful planning. But he also remembered the mentors who had taken the time to share their knowledge, even when he wasn't initially receptive to their guidance. Their patient persistence had eventually saved his life and the lives of soldiers under his command. The memorial wall in the hallway served as a constant reminder of why this training mattered. Every photograph represented someone who had trusted their life to the planning and leadership of others. Thompson and Torres would never have another chance to benefit from improved training or better leadership, but future generations of SEALs could learn from their sacrifice. As Marcus continued his dual role as janitor and training consultant, he found himself thinking about the nature of service and contribution. For 8 years, he had defined his service in terms of staying out of the way and maintaining facilities. Now he was discovering that his most valuable contribution might be sharing the knowledge he had gained through decades of dangerous experience. The irony wasn't lost on him that Lieutenant Commander Harrison, who had dismissed him as an irrelevant janitor, might have benefited more than anyone from his perspective on intelligence analysis and contingency planning. But Harrison had been too arrogant to recognize wisdom when it was offered by someone he considered beneath his notice. Master Chief Sullivan had been right about the need for different perspectives in military planning. The most dangerous enemy of effective operations wasn't enemy fire or equipment failure. It was the assumption that rank and position automatically conferred wisdom and infallibility. As Marcus locked up his cleaning supplies each evening and prepared to head home, he carried with him the knowledge that his quiet service was evolving into something more significant. The young warriors he observed during training exercises would soon be making life and death decisions in hostile environments. If his experience could help them avoid the mistakes that had cost Thompson and Torres their lives, then perhaps his years of background service had prepared him for this more visible role. The transition from invisible janitor to respected consultant would not be complete for several more months, but the foundation was being established through each training session and planning exercise. Marcus was learning to share his knowledge effectively, and the officers were learning to value input from unexpected sources. The real test, however, would come when these lessons were applied in actual combat operations, where the consequences of poor planning and closed-minded leadership were measured in lives rather than training scores. 6 months after the failed Afghanistan mission, Marcus was cleaning the armory when he overheard Master Chief Sullivan on a secure telephone call. The conversation was tense, with long pauses and Sullivan's voice carrying the stress that came with developing crisis situations. "Understood, sir. We'll have a response team ready within the hour," Sullivan said before ending the call. Marcus continued organizing cleaning supplies, but his attention was focused on Sullivan's next series of phone calls. Emergency deployment protocols were being activated for a rescue mission in Syria, where a reconnaissance team had been compromised and was surrounded by hostile forces. Within minutes, the base erupted into controlled chaos. Officers and enlisted personnel moved with practiced efficiency, gathering equipment and preparing for rapid deployment. The situation was critical, for American Special Operations soldiers were trapped in a defensive position with limited ammunition and no clear extraction route. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, who had participated in Marcus's training sessions, was selected to lead the rescue operation. Her team would insert via helicopter and fight their way to the surrounded Americans, then coordinate an extraction under hostile fire. Marcus watched the preparations with professional interest, noting the speed and efficiency of the deployment process. But he also observed the stress levels and hurried decision-making that came with time-critical operations. Rescue missions were inherently dangerous, with little time for careful planning and high potential for additional casualties. Master Chief Sullivan approached him as the team prepared their equipment. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. "What kind of problem?" "The trap team had a long-range shooter position, but the enemy is dug in about 1,500 meters away. Our guys can't get close enough to engage effectively, and the rescue team doesn't have the right equipment for that distance." Marcus understood immediately. 1,500 meters was beyond the effective range of standard SEAL weapons. They needed a specialized long-range rifle system to engage targets at that distance accurately. "What about the Barrett?" Marcus asked, referring to the M107.50 caliber sniper rifle that was available in the armory. "We have one, but nobody on the rescue team has extensive experience with long-range precision shooting. The guys who do are deployed elsewhere." Sullivan looked at Marcus with an expression that suggested he was considering an unusual solution to the problem. "How extensive is your experience with the M107? Marcus paused in his cleaning. He had hoped his days of carrying rifles into combat were permanently behind him. But the image of 4 trapped soldiers facing overwhelming enemy forces made the decision easier than it should have been. "I'm familiar with the system," he said carefully. "How familiar?" "I've made shots at that distance before." Sullivan nodded grimly. "Would you be willing to join the mission as a consultant? Civilian contractor providing technical expertise." Marcus set down his cleaning supplies and looked at the Master Chief. After 38 years, he was being asked to return to his original profession, solving problems with precision rifle fire. "I'm not qualified for active combat operations anymore. I'm a janitor." "You're a janitor with more special operations experience than anyone else on this base. Those soldiers don't care about your current job title." The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Commander Chun approaching them. Her face was tight with stress and the pressure of organizing a complex rescue operation under severe time constraints. "Chief, we need to discuss the long-range engagement problem," she said. "The enemy has positioned heavy weapons that can dominate the extraction zone from elevated positions. We need to neutralize those positions before we can get our people out." Sullivan looked at Marcus, then back at Chun. "I may have a solution, but it's unconventional. At this point, I'm open to any solution that will bring our people home alive." Marcus here has extensive experience with long-range precision shooting. He's offered to assist with the technical aspects of the engagement. Chun looked skeptical. "The janitor? I thought he was just a training consultant." "He's a combat veteran with specialized skills that we need for this mission. The choice is yours," but we don't have time to bring in additional personnel from other units. Chun studied Marcus with new interest, seeing him differently now that his potential contribution was directly relevant to her mission's success. What kind of experience are we talking about? Enough to make the shots you need, Marcus replied. But I haven't carried a rifle in combat for 8 years. You'd be taking a risk. The bigger risk is leaving our people trapped with limited ammunition and no way to neutralize the enemy heavy weapons. Can you make a 1,500-meter shot with the M107? Marcus considered the question carefully. The M107 was a reliable system, and 1,500 meters was well within his previous operational parameters. But 8 years of cleaning floors had not maintained his physical conditioning or his familiarity with the weapon system. I can make the shot, he said finally, but I'll need time to familiarize myself with the specific rifle and to zero the scope for current conditions. Chun checked her watch. You have 20 minutes before we load onto the helicopters. Will that be enough? It will have to be. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Marcus retrieved the M107 from the armory and quickly examined the weapon system, checking the scope mounts, bolt operation, and overall condition. The rifle was well maintained and properly configured, but every weapon had its own characteristics that affected accuracy at long range. The base firing range was hastily cleared for Marcus to zero the scope and familiarize himself with the rifle's performance. He fired 3 rounds at a 1,000-meter target, making minor adjustments to the scope settings and noting the weapon's recoil characteristics and trigger response. As he worked, Marcus felt muscle memory returning from decades of similar preparations. His hands moved automatically through the process of range estimation, wind reading, and ballistic calculations. The skills were still there, buried under 8 years of civilian life, but ready to emerge when needed. Lieutenant Commander Chin watched the zeroing process with growing confidence. Marcus's movements were smooth and professional, with the economy of motion that came from extensive experience. His first shot hit the target within inches of the bullseye, and his subsequent adjustments brought the impacts to dead center. When was the last time you used one of these in combat? Chin asked as Marcus packed additional ammunition. 2016 Afghanistan. Different circumstances, but similar requirements. What was the target? Taliban commander directing an ambush against a patrol. Single shot at 1,800 meters. Chin nodded, reassured by the specificity of the answer. Marcus wasn't boasting or exaggerating. He was providing factual information about his capabilities. The helicopter flight to Syria took 3 hours, during which Marcus reviewed satellite imagery of the target area and studied the positions of both the trapped American soldiers and the enemy forces surrounding them. The situation was complex, with multiple enemy positions covering the approaches to the trapped team's location. The enemy had positioned 2 heavy machine gun nests approximately 1,500 meters from the American defensive position. These weapons controlled the primary extraction routes and had already prevented 2 previous rescue attempts. Neutralizing these positions was essential for mission success. Marcus calculated the ballistic requirements for the engagement, accounting for altitude, temperature, humidity, and wind conditions. The shots would be challenging, but well within the capabilities of both the weapon system and his own skills. As the helicopters approached the insertion point, Marcus checked his equipment one final time. In addition to the M107 rifle, he carried a laser rangefinder, ballistic calculator, and enough ammunition for extended engagement if necessary. His role was specifically limited to long-range precision fire support for the rescue operation. The insertion went smoothly, with Chen's team establishing a defensive perimeter while Marcus moved to a position that provided clear sight lines to the enemy positions. The trapped American team was visible through his scope, pinned down in rocky terrain with enemies closing in from multiple directions. Overwatch 1. This is Rescue 6. Chen's voice came through his radio headset. Do you have eyes on the primary targets? Marcus adjusted his scope and identified the first enemy machine gun position. Two fighters were operating the weapon while others moved nearby, preparing for a final assault on the trapped Americans. Rescue 6, Overwatch 1 has positive identification on target Alpha. Heavy machine gun position with multiple personnel. Range 1,520 meters. You are cleared to engage target Alpha. Marcus steadied his breathing and aligned the crosshairs on the machine gunner. The wind was light and consistent, requiring minimal adjustment for drift. He squeezed the trigger smoothly, and the .50 caliber round impacted exactly where he had aimed. The enemy machine gunner collapsed immediately, and the heavy weapon fell silent. The other fighters around the position scrambled for cover, unsure where the shot had originated. Target Alpha is down, Marcus reported, moving to Target Bravo. The second machine gun position was located in a different direction, requiring Marcus to adjust his position and recalculate the ballistics for a slightly longer range. Through his scope, he could see the trapped American team beginning to move, taking advantage of the suppressed enemy fire. Overwatch 1, Rescue 6. Target Bravo is still active and engaging our people. Can you neutralize? Marcus located the second machine gun position and identified the gunner. This shot was more challenging due to increased range and a partially concealed target, but it was still within his capabilities. He fired twice in rapid succession. The first round disabled the machine gun, while the second eliminated the gunner. The enemy position fell silent, and the immediate threat to the extraction was neutralized. Both primary targets are down, Marcus reported. Enemy small arms fire is continuing from multiple positions, but the heavy weapons are out of action. Chin's rescue team moved quickly to exploit the temporary advantage. With the machine gun positions eliminated, they could advance toward the trapped Americans without facing overwhelming firepower. The extraction became a matter of coordinated movement and suppressive fire rather than a suicide mission against fortified positions. Over the next 30 minutes, Marcus provided precision fire support for the rescue operation, eliminating specific threats and suppressing enemy positions as the rescue team fought their way to the trapped soldiers. His shots were selective and carefully aimed, designed to maximize tactical advantage while minimizing ammunition expenditure. The Barrett M107 performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, delivering accurate fire at ranges that exceeded the capabilities of standard infantry weapons. Marcus's muscle memory and experience allowed him to adapt quickly to changing tactical situations and engage multiple targets with professional efficiency. Overwatch 1, this is Rescue 6. We have positive control of the objective and are beginning extraction. Outstanding work. Marcus maintained his Overwatch position as the combined team moved toward the extraction point. Enemy forces were regrouping and attempting to pursue, but his long-range fire kept them at a distance where their weapons were less effective. The helicopter extraction was conducted under sporadic enemy fire, but without the coordinated heavy weapons that had made previous rescue attempts impossible. Marcus was the last person to board the aircraft, carrying the M107 that had made the mission possible. During the flight back to the base, Lieutenant Commander Chun approached Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude and newfound respect. "I owe you an apology," she said over the engine noise. "I underestimated your capabilities and your value to our operations. No apology necessary. You made the right decision for your mission. How did you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus smiled grimly. 30 years of practice and more dangerous situations than I care to remember. Would you consider returning to active duty? We need people with your skills. Marcus looked out the helicopter window at the hostile terrain below, thinking about the path that had brought him from young paratrooper to special operations soldier to janitor to reluctant warrior once again. I think my active duty days are behind me, but I'm willing to help with training and consulting when needed. Chin nodded. The offer stands if you change your mind. Today you saved 4 American lives and made a critical mission possible. That's not something a person walks away from easily. As the helicopters crossed into friendly airspace, Marcus reflected on the events of the day. He had returned to his original profession after 8 years of civilian life, and the skills were still there when they were needed. But he had also rediscovered the stress and responsibility that came with life and death decisions in combat environments. The rescue mission had been successful, with all 5 trapped soldiers extracted safely and no additional casualties among the rescue team. The enemy had been denied a propaganda victory and had lost significant personnel to precision rifle fire. From a tactical standpoint, the operation had achieved all its objectives. But Marcus knew that success in one mission didn't erase the broader challenges facing the special operations community. Young officers like Harrison would continue to make dangerous decisions based on inadequate experience and excessive confidence. Training programs could address some of these issues, but the fundamental problems of leadership and judgment required broader solutions. Upon returning to the base, Marcus found himself in an unusual position. Word of his role in the rescue mission spread quickly through the special operations community, transforming his reputation from invisible janitor to respected combat veteran. Officers who had previously ignored him now sought his advice on tactical matters and operational planning. Master Chief Sullivan observed the change with satisfaction. "I told you that experience and wisdom could come from unexpected sources," he said during one of their evening conversations. "I never wanted to be the center of attention," Marcus replied. "I chose the janitorial position specifically to avoid this kind of recognition. Sometimes we don't get to choose our role. Sometimes circumstances choose it for us." The base commander, Captain James Morrison, summoned Marcus to his office to discuss the events of the rescue mission and his future role on the base. Morrison was a pragmatic leader who understood the value of institutional knowledge and operational experience. "I've read your service record," Morrison said as Marcus sat across from his desk. 30 years of special operations experience, including assignments that are still classified. Why didn't anyone know about your background when you were hired?" "I didn't volunteer the information, and nobody asked. I was applying for a janitorial position, not a tactical consulting role." "Well, that's changed now. I'm creating a new position for you, Senior Military Advisor for Training and Operations. Your civilian status will be maintained, but your role will expand significantly." Marcus considered the offer carefully. It would mean abandoning his quiet routine and accepting responsibility for training the next generation of special operations leaders. But the memory of Thompson and Torres, killed in a mission that could have been planned better, made the decision easier. "I accept the position, but I want to maintain some of my cleaning duties. It keeps me connected to the daily operations and allows me to observe things that might not be apparent in formal briefings." Morrison smiled. "Whatever works. Your experience with the M107 yesterday proved that conventional thinking about personnel roles can be dangerously limiting." Over the following months, Marcus developed a comprehensive training program that combined traditional special operations techniques with lessons learned from his decades of combat experience. Young officers learned to value input from all sources, to plan for contingencies, and to recognize that rank was no substitute for wisdom. The memorial wall and the hallway serve as a constant reminder of why this training mattered. Thompson and Torres had paid the ultimate price for leadership failures that could have been prevented through better education and more humble attitudes among officers. But the empty spaces on the wall that would have been filled by the 4 soldiers rescued in Syria represented the positive potential of proper planning and experienced leadership. The M107 rifle that had made their rescue possible was now displayed in the training center, a symbol of how unexpected resources could be mobilized to achieve critical objectives. Marcus continued his work with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found his proper place after years of searching. He was no longer an invisible janitor or a reluctant warrior, but a bridge between generations of special operations personnel, sharing hard-earned wisdom with those who would carry the mission forward. The transformation from laughed-at janitor to respected advisor had taken 8 years to complete, but it reflected the broader truth that experience and wisdom could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. The young SEALs who had once dismissed him as irrelevant now sought his guidance on matters of life and death, understanding that respect had to be earned through demonstrated competence rather than assumed through organizational position. Each morning, as Marcus unlocked the training center and prepared for another day of teaching and learning, he carried with him the knowledge that his service continued in a new form. The floors still needed cleaning, and the trash can still needed emptying, but these routine tasks now served a larger purpose of maintaining connection to the daily reality of military operations. The M107 Barrett rifle remained in its case most days, a reminder of capabilities that could be called upon when circumstances required. But Marcus's most valuable weapon had become his experience and his willingness to share it with others, ensuring that future missions would benefit from lessons learned through decades of dangerous trial and error. In the end, the janitor had saved the SEAL platoon not through his skill with a rifle, although that had been essential, but through his patient willingness to mentor young leaders and challenge dangerous assumptions. The real victory was not the successful rescue mission in Syria, but the prevention of future tragedies through better training and more thoughtful leadership development. The laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by respect and recognition that wisdom could emerge from the most unexpected sources when circumstances revealed its true value.